So good morning, everyone. I am Chris Wallach, principal at East School, and on behalf of Jan Murphy, West School principal, and Matt Kazkak, South School principal, we welcome you today to this joint elementary PTC meeting here in New Canaan. And the elementary schools work very collaboratively throughout the year. I'm constantly meeting with Jan and Matt. We work collaboratively, whether it's around curriculum and instruction, whether it's our budgets, or even talking about events at our schools for author visits and performing arts events that we hold. So we work very collaboratively, and it's always a pleasure to have our PTCs working collaboratively as well. And so this morning we are really excited to welcome New Canaan Cares, and the speakers that they bring to us each year are wonderful. And I think today's topic of sibling relationships, rivalry, and birth order is a really interesting one. In our elementary schools, we continue to develop our children's social skills, problem solving and conflict resolution skills, here in our schools as they're growing and interacting with their peers and navigating friendship challenges. But certainly this topic of sibling relationships is also very timely in helping all of us, whether we're in the educator role or I'm also looking at this as a parent and through my parent lens, and very interested to hear about some strategies for some of that skill building in that realm as well for families and children in our homes. So I'm going to turn this over to Stacy Walker. She is from New Canaan Cares, and she's going to introduce today's speaker to us. And I look forward to this. Thanks, Stacy, for being here.
Thank you, Chris, for having us. And thank you to all the principals at the elementary schools and to the PTC presidents here at New Canaan Care. We're so grateful for the partnership at our schools, and we are happy to be here today. As Chris said, I'm Stacy Walker. I'm the Education and Program Coordinator at New Canaan Cares. Some of you may be familiar with us, but those of you who are new to New Canaan, or perhaps our younger families, you may not know who we are. And I'm just going to let you know a little bit about us. We are an independent nonprofit here in the community. We've been here for over 40 years, and our purpose is to advance the health and well-being of children and families. We provide educational programs and professional development that support and strengthen parenting skills, positive youth development, and healthy lifestyles. And some of our programs include workshops for parents and youth, leadership skills offered at the elementary, middle, and high school level, small group sessions upon request. So if you have a small group and you have needs, please feel free to reach out to us. And we actually also as well do intergenerational community events. And in true flexibility for COVID, this morning we were supposed to have Lenore Dweck with us, but she is not feeling well. So we were very fortunate to have one of her colleagues, Deanna Lindberg, with us today. And Deanna Lindberg is from Sasko River. She is an occupational therapist. And as she says, she works on occupations that involve interacting as part of a family. She's the clinical director of occupational therapy at Sasko River Center. She has her bachelor's in psychology from the University of Scranton and her master's in occupational therapy from Sacred Heart University. Her passion lies in parent and professional education in child development, as well as working to progress the fields of multidisciplinary care. Welcome, Deanna.
Thank you. So I'm going to share my screen, and then I will introduce what I'll be talking about today. We're good, Stacy? Okay, great. Thank you everybody for coming out today, and thank you for your flexibility. Lenore feels terribly that she can't be here, but her and I work closely on lots of different cases. So it was an easy switch to be able to kind of take over this topic. I will say, full disclosure, Lenore is a BCBA, so a behavior analyst. So she actually designed most of this PowerPoint. And I'm an occupational therapist. So I'm saying that you're going to get a little bit of the best of both worlds, because you're going to get all her knowledge, which she so nicely put together for me. But I will also be adding in a piece with siblings about family co-regulation, family regulation strategies, and how those types of activities can help the family unit kind of work together. But you'll also get some of Lenore's tips and tricks as well. So thank you for your flexibility. And I know you might be asking what is an occupational therapist kind of involved in this type of topic? And like Stacy said, occupational therapy can really, it's a really diverse field, and it can be from everything from what is known commonly in the school system as kind of fine motor or even sometimes sensory skills for regulation in the school, but it can kind of be more than that. We look at barriers to kind of operating in your daily occupations, whether that's at school or in the home, and being part of the family unit. So I definitely do some parent coaching from that perspective. So you'll get a little bit of an occupational therapy flair to this topic. But siblings and family dynamics are such an important topic, because when they're not in school, the rest of the time is with the family. And sometimes we all have something. So we're going to go into kind of what each type of role or status of the family is, and kind of what are the positives of those roles, and what can be the things to keep an eye on and work through. I know there can definitely be those family dynamics that are pulling each other's hair out, as Lenore phrased it when she was asking me to cover yesterday. She said, you just take it away from that point on with all your regulation tips. But it can be a really supportive and place where they're learning other skills, not only in school, but at home as well. So kind of to get into the nitty gritty and not go into any more background, is why do siblings struggle? So the family is a social hierarchy. So if you think of, other types of social hierarchies, even in our jobs, you want, to get the most recognition. Families that can be the same way. So when a sibling is born, there can be the feeling of, might I get less time or less affection or even less approval if my parents spending time elsewhere. A cool research study actually showed that when there are more siblings born, you do love more. It is very much possible. I know that's a phrase a lot of parents use, but your heart and kind of your ability to give that does increase. So kind of like the Grinch that stole Christmas, it can increase 3 sizes. But really all children just want to feel accepted, whether it's accepted at home by their parents, by their siblings, at school, accepted by their peers. And when we see behaviors, it's really a form of communication. So sometimes it's a communication of fear that they're not going to be accepted, or that they're frustrated with kind of a change. So that's what we look for when we see some behaviors. Sometimes when a sibling is born, or kind of that next sibling comes into the picture, that older child will want to will sometimes show kind of an adjustment period. It's a change, and anytime there's a change. When we adjusted to COVID, when we adjusted to a change from elementary school to high school or middle school, there's a period of stress, and sometimes you can see behaviors come out with that. They might show a need for more or needing the most. It kind of can be in a little bit of a competition until they see that, okay, mom and dad are showing me attention and love me the same, which same and equal. We'll talk a little bit about that, as sometimes there can be individual needs, but it's kind of, as long as you're meeting each child's individual needs, they will feel secure in that attachment. So the best way with anything, with any behaviors, whether we're talking about sibling rivalry or you're talking about challenges in other ways, is trying to prevent it. It is always easier to prevent it, although I think it's the hardest way to think about, because we don't think about what until it's in our face, what's going on here, or it's not doesn't feel like a need to you. But when we're looking at a child being born, doing things to prepare, and I know this is kind of in every baby book, or the second baby book, is to talk about the baby in humanizing ways. So what do you feel like the baby's feeling right now? Getting the child, your oldest child or your first child, to be empathetic to the child that's being born, having them involved in the process, showing them how they're the same in some They have feelings. They can feel joy. Why do you think the baby's sleeping in my tummy? If they're kicking, do you think he or she's having a dream? Do you think that she's really happy right now? Getting involved when it is before the baby's born, and that you have the time change that you're going to be spending more time with that infant that has different needs. You can also get the child involved in preparing certain areas or singing to the baby. So they're kind of forming a connection before they're even born. Again, another thing that really helps children is explaining what will happen when the baby arises. So set expectations, or sometimes some families can even set up stories. So you can make your own storybook, and children love to read at night. You can put your own family pictures, and you can go over what will it look like when the new baby arrives, or if you're adopting, when the new child arrives. What will stay the same, what might change, and what will the positives be, and what might be the harder parts, and how you're going to work on that as a family. We all like to have plans. Uncertainty makes us all nervous, no matter who we are. So helping a child to understand what's coming next. And storybooks are great because they can also see it. So sometimes it doesn't stick in their memory if they're younger, but having their book, then that's theirs, that's something special. And they can even add to the book once the baby's born, or the child's adopted, pictures of the family, and it can be used as a tool to help to explain their feelings too. Something important is that if the child's a little bit older, they might be comparing their experience with some of their friends who really enjoy playing with their siblings. And that is certainly going to be part of the sibling experience, but an infant isn't really a playmate probably until at least 6 months. Then you can get more interaction and that feedback of, he or she's laughing at me. And they will become a playmate down the road, but it's just not right away. So sometimes that, because children watch TV or their experiences with their peers, that's kind of how they can view a sibling, and then kind of get frustrated that that sibling's taking more time because the infant has a lot of needs. So kind of setting that expectation early on. You can also do practice with baby dolls. Where can the baby be touched, and how can I use the right amount of force to touch the baby? What's fun ways to interact with the baby? So realizing what might be fun to a 5-year-old. Those types of toys might not be fun for a baby, but because of they're young children, they see the world from their point of view. So what's fun to me probably is fun for somebody else, whereas they might not see that yet. So giving them some explicit instruction can be helpful. You can talk about what the baby will need. So babies do need a lot of help with kind of the basic parts of everyday life. They need to be changed a lot, they need to be fed, and they need to be held. So kind of setting that expectation that that baby needs more, and that the older child also is getting what they need from the relationship. And if the child's open to it, having them help. So can they help set up parts of the nursery, or maybe a special spot that they'll read with the baby, and having them involved in the process. If they want to be more involved, that's great. Such as, can you grab mommy a diaper or daddy a diaper, something like that. If they can feel part of the process, because then that's also time they're spending with you when you're also with your second or third child. I wouldn't recommend forcing them to help. Some children will need a little bit of time to process, and forcing that relationship can sometimes have some pushback, but it will naturally progress over time, and giving a lot of positive reinforcement when you see them helping and things like that. I didn't say at the beginning, but I'm going to do about half the presentation first, and then I'll stop for some questions, and then we'll have a little bit of Q&A at the end as well. So when a new sibling is brought into the family, the older sibling typically has a feeling of excitement, but they will also notice they might not be getting all the attention. So they are just certainly used to getting all the attention. There's the only one that was in the house prior. It's expected and normal, so it's going to be an adjustment period. They might feel angry, they might act out, kind of have this initial feeling of get rid of them. Doesn't mean that they're, trying to hurt somebody willfully. It's just that's a normal reaction to a huge change in a social command. But ways that you can help this tendency is to provide one-on-one time. And as an OT, I always recommend trying to help a child visualize their one-on-one time. So maybe taking a picture or drawing a picture on a calendar of what you did with mom or dad every day. And you always have at least minimum 5 minutes, but I like to at least 15 minutes of one-on-one time with your child daily. And it's something that's never taken away. So that is, even if they're having a really hard adjustment and there's other consequences, this one-on-one time is purely for your attachment and that positive bonding experience. Reinforcing the older sibling when they do something kind and helpful. So when we're talking about if the older sibling gets a diaper, kind of talking about, oh, that's so helpful to mom and their sibling. So talking about how it both benefits the sibling and the parent, because sometimes they might not be as motivated to help the sibling yet, but they might be motivated to kind of help their parent or get that positive praise from their parent. It's also okay to acknowledge their emotions. So a lot of times we have a tendency to either go into overly acknowledging emotions and kind of allowing a lot of behaviors because we feel badly. We just want to make our children feel better if they're going through an adjustment phase. So, okay, it's normal. We'll just kind of let all these things slide. Or the other side is kind of sometimes we can tend to set a lot of boundaries because we don't want it to get out of hand. The best approach is that middle ground. So acknowledging the emotion. I get that you're angry. Mom has to spend some time with your sibling, but I'm going to spend time with you later. But reminding them of the positives and kind of setting a limit so it's not kind of cycling, and that the child will adjust to new boundaries just like they adjust every year in the classroom. And there's slightly different social expectations, and if you're consistent, they will progress. The middle sibling, I know that always gets the most kind of talked about in today's culture, but when a new child is born with the middle sibling, so a third child, they might feel a loss of attention. So while they have a baseline that might not have been the same baseline as the first child, because they're kind of used to splitting it with one person, they are still can be worried about splitting with a third or a fourth or fifth. This is also where they can feel that they might have to also do better than the first sibling. The first sibling is going to be the first one, or many times the older sibling will be the first one to accomplish many great tasks. They'll graduate kindergarten or middle school first. They're going to learn how to ride a bike first. All these really exciting family moments, which will get a lot of attention, which can sometimes leave this feeling that the second sibling is trying to at least keep up or do better. We'll talk about things you can do, but really kind of capturing their moments and making them just as big too is a really important piece. Sometimes they can be confused of their role in the family. So they're, especially when a third sibling is born, they're no longer the younger one, which they've kind of adjusted to. Okay, the older one will do the things first, the younger one will do them next. But now they're kind of trying to adjust of how does that work? I see somebody in the chat. Oh, never mind. Stacy is just checking in with everybody. Things you can do here. So offering reassurance and explanation. So very similar to the first sibling. Not leaving them out. Paying particular attention to praising them for their accomplishments. I know this is a hard one, but no hand-me-downs if it can be helped. Obviously, finances can be a factor, or logistics. Sometimes I recommend having some hand-me-downs between families, so it seems really new versus just kind of from a sibling or building that sibling dynamic piece. So it's new to them, and they could be helping somebody else out or a friend out versus kind of, oh, this is somebody else or my older sibling's piece. and capturing their moments too. I think I mentioned this, but also how you can have a try to have equal books or ways of accomplishments, particularly if the child's aware of them. So I know a lot of times it's easy to kind of take those month by month or year reviews for your first child, but then the second and third, it can get a lot harder. There's less time. You know, a lot of times the oldest child's not aware of everything, but if once they are at the age that they are more aware, trying to keep kind of what you're showing to them in terms of accomplishments similar, even if they're different. And then the younger sibling, that the biggest feelings that can come out with them is they can feel angry because they don't have everything that the older ones have. That's, you know, expected. Obviously, someone older is going to have the privilege first. And that's kind of part of the advantage of being older, and should be something celebrated for them. But ways you can kind of help manage these behaviors is pointing out the privileges that the child does have, thinking of privileges that they can kind of work towards based off of kind of what they're doing in terms of their maturity level. And also, again, ways to find praise and reinforcement for their accomplishments. Psychologists and research shows that for every one corrective, you want to have about 5 positives, and that's a really high number. You almost have to constantly thinking about how can I give positive reinforcement, and the more children that you have, I know it becomes even harder because that you're constantly trying to juggle where's so-and-so supposed to be. You end up giving a lot of small correctives during the day, like even things like, make sure you get your bag. Did you get your bag? Did you get your bag? That can become kind of repetitive, but even things like, thanks for getting to the car on time. I'm trying to think of ways to just make it simple, but that they can be celebrated for their accomplishments, even if they're small, and engaging in a positive and appropriate way. Again, kind of ways to prevent this rivalry. And I will go into some more kind of ways to positively play as a family, but helping children develop the fun in their relationship. So seeing the things they can do together and that are really exciting. I, as an OT for families, like to do a lot of cooperative play among siblings or competitive play against the parents. So it's like team kids and then team parents. So they're working together in those types of activities. What can you do with more people than you want to be able to do with less people, things like that. Model the behavior that you want to see. So especially as parents, it's completely normal to get frustrated, and we all experience our own stress. And I think kind of children tend to see our stress as either once we're at our wit's end or us holding it all together, versus kind of modeling, and we'll talk about inviting emotions in and saying, you know what, I had a hard day and this is what I did today to work through it. I went on a run after work, or you know, I called grandma. Things that show that you're not perfect either, and that's okay. So it also kind of shows that a child how to work through some of their emotions and behaviors, because they're modeling off of you and learn from what they see. Creating a family charter can be a fun activity. I know a lot of classrooms do this kind of in the first week of school. They'll go over kind of what are some of the expectations, and maybe even set a mission statement. Our family respects everybody, tries their best, and works to try to have fun. It doesn't have to be complicated, but something that when things get a little out of hand, you can go back to the charter when we talk about something called peer mediation. Encouraging children to stop and think about their actions. Peer mediation, which we'll talk about, which is allowing both sides of the situation to be heard and addressed, and helping them to work it out together as well. Family regulation. So I will give some OT-based activities that can just help the whole family work on stress management and help them be in a regulated place. can also cultivate empathy, talking about different feelings, whether it's from a TV show or other experiences other families close to you have, so that way they can have empathy in their own siblings as well. I already talked about inviting emotions in. Focusing on individual needs, not equal amounts. So you're being fair by catering to each child's individual needs, but it might not always be equal time, but it is fairly distributed. So an infant obviously needs a lot of time in terms of getting changed, or a child might have different unique learning needs, and they might need support in that way. So each child's getting their needs met. It might just not be the equal amount. And loving your child uniquely. I think from what my experience, sometimes, if you think of our everyday life, we get to choose our friends, and you get to choose your spouse, and you don't get to necessarily choose your family and all the other aspects of that. And it's really easy to connect well with a child that might be a lot like you, but you might have children that aren't so much like you, and might be not the person that you kind of would seek out in your everyday life, but finding those connections and loving them uniquely, and realizing that that they are all different, and figuring out ways to connect is important. Before I move forward, I know that was just a lot of background. We're going to talk about kind of what they're fighting now, what to do. Is there any questions or comments that have come up before I move forward?
I don't see any in the chat, but if anyone has questions or comments, please put them in the chat to me. Thank you.
Awesome. Okay, and I'll keep going. And I feel like this is what everybody's most looking for. So they're fighting now. What do I do? Kind of talk about 3 different levels of fighting. There's normal bickering, and that's going to happen. And if anything, that teaches them the skill of conflict resolution that only children might not develop until later. So that's actually a huge positive. The best thing to do in those instances is ignoring the behavior. That's a very common principle of ignoring things that aren't escalating, because a lot of times children are doing it for attention, or just because something came up. If you give attention to it, then they might learn they get attention from kind of normal bickering. So ignoring it and trying to let them work it out on their own. So this is the next kind of step. The situation's escalating. Maybe there's a little, there's a lot more yelling, kind of toys going back and forth, those types of things. You can kind of come into the room, acknowledging the emotion, reflect on each child's point of view, describe the problem with understanding and respect. So I see you're having difficulty sharing the toy, or I see that playing together is challenging right now, but expressing that you have confidence they can solve the problem, and then leave the room. This gives us children the skills to be able to work on problem solving. Now, is this going to work every single time? No, but if we can start to practice this, they will know that you have the confidence in them that they can manage some of these challenging situations. Now, this is where the situation's escalating further. This is where now, as an adult, you have to get much more involved. If it's either not regulating after several minutes, or that becomes a minor safety concern. Again, you just want to describe what you see without putting judgment onto the situation. So I see we're having difficulty sharing, or I see that you pulled the toy from somebody. We're going to cool off for a moment, and we'll talk a little bit about, I'm a huge proponent of everyone in the family having their own cool off area in the house. I think it teaches an important skill of self-regulation, which is something we're all developing throughout our lives. But if you can model that as a parent and go into your cool down area, children can start to model that and go into their cool down area. And they can it can be a family project. You can decorate your cool down area. A big one I like to recommend for parents is using a closet, because it's kind of enclosed. It keeps them away. You can put like pillows in it. and it gets really cozy with a couple of regulation tools, like maybe something to help them breathe, like a quiet whistle, or something to squeeze to regulate, kind of having a cool down area. And you're letting them know that we're going to the cool down area because it's not safe to stay together. So they'll be in their safe spots. And then after they're calmed down and regulated, then you can bring them in for kind of a peer regulation, which we'll get into. That might be within 10 minutes, that might be 40 minutes. You really want the children, both sides, to be able to be regulated in order to kind of move into the peer mediation phase. So once they're ready and calmed down and ready for peer mediation, you can have a spot for that in your house. I like to put up kind of visual boundaries. So whether it's sitting in 2 different chairs, or if you're doing it on the floor, you're both sitting on separate blankets. So that way you're not kind of inclined to get onto each other's space, but laying down the ground rules. So this, you're saying, we're going to talk about what happened. Is everybody ready to talk? If they're not giving your consent to move forward, you can separate them and have them go back to their cool down area. So until they're ready to kind of move forward, and this takes practice. So if if there's a lot of sibling rivalry in your house, going to a complete peer mediation model, it's going to be kind of a shock, can be a shock to them. Sometimes you can have a family meeting of, this is how we're going to handle conflict moving forward, and kind of giving them those expectations before a conflict happens. So that way it doesn't feel like a huge change in routine. And you can talk about what that looks like. So one child talks at a time. You can draw straws or out of a hat, something so that it's neutral, and they were not perceiving it as unfair. You can let the one child kind of express what happened from their point of view within limits. So you don't want them to be talking on and on, 2 to 3 minutes of describing their point of view, maybe even less. And then it'll switch to the other child. The key rule here is that there shouldn't be any interruption. So a lot of times one child will say, oh, so-and-so took the toy from me. And the other child will want to say, oh, but he took it first. So the real goal here is that there's not any interruption. The other child will get their turn to say their piece when it's time. During this time, you can ask each child their feelings and concerns, and rephrasing the thoughts and feelings. So you were mad when your brother took the truck from you, something like that. The other child could say that you were mad when he wasn't sharing his truck originally. Fostering mutual empathy and understanding kind of helps them to see the other perspective of, oh, it must have felt awful when he took the truck from you, saying to the brother. And you can kind of reflect, if there's the other side, for you to reflect that piece as well. If there was hitting must have hurt you. Sorry. You can also have the child reflect back what they heard. So that way they don't get into a pattern of just saying their feelings and not listening to the siblings' feelings. And then you can brainstorm together to, how can we solve this problem? So a lot of times children will actually have ideas to solve it together. Sometimes they'll think of putting a timer on playing with the trucks, or playing with together. They'll kind of make the option to try to share. You want to make sure you reel in far-fetched ideas. Sometimes children are going to say, I'm going to play with my truck in my room and never come out, because then I'll have to share. That's kind of a far-fetched idea, but kind of reel it in of, okay, well, if we are playing, what's something realistic? And then deciding on a solution that works best for the entire family. The key things you want to remember when you're doing peer mediation is not to suppress their emotions. Emotions are good. We all have them. Sometimes we have positive emotions, and sometimes we have emotions that are harder to manage, and they're going to happen every day and throughout our life. It's our behaviors around the emotion that we want to be working on. You want to be careful not to give attention to the aggressor. So if there was a hitting, or something that you were able to see that the other child was sharing or not sharing, like pulling a toy from somebody or something like that, actually giving the attention to the child that it pulled from. So kind of saying, oh, that must have really stunk when Johnny took the truck from you. Giving attention to the aggressor, which is kind of everyone's gut instinct of don't do that, actually kind of can be, it gets that attention that we talked about from the beginning, that they could be looking for. But reflecting and talking about the other child's emotion can say, oh, I'm not going to get attention from this. I'm not getting what I necessarily want. We want to make sure that, giving both children, once it's escalated, a time to cool off, that it's not just the one child. That can impact kind of sibling relationships of, if this isn't fair, if things are escalating, everybody needs a time to cool off. Really making sure that it's not treating one child or one sibling like a bully and the other child like a victim, because it can change in the next moment. You can have a different situation, and that's why reflecting their feelings back to them is important, and helping them to work through that. Certain statements tend to escalate situations more. They tend to be our go-to statements too, because when we see people, especially children, in distress, it's very normal for your own stress level to increase. But to go to simple things like "stop it," "why can't you get along," or "why did you do that?" That's almost our stress response, and that's, I think, a key piece in a lot of literature now is talking about co-regulation. And I think that's an important piece when I work with parents, of what are my regulatory strategies when I see my kids escalating. Do I need to take a minute? Do deep breaths help me? Do some progressive muscle relaxation techniques, like squeezing your muscles, so that way it releases kind of calming chemicals for you. But what are your regulation techniques, so that way you can use your own plan? And just like we talked about for the story of what to do when the next child's born, sometimes adults need kind of, what's your game plan, and building your plan so you know what to do, and reviewing it at night. And sometimes even I'll recommend little cues in the kitchen or common areas that's just like a pink Post-it. Now, it doesn't even have to be anything on it, but it's your cue of, okay, I'm supposed to regulate, or how I'm trying to use these sibling management strategies. Going a little bit into the OT, kind of how can we foster positive relationships with peers and our siblings, is setting up positive playtime. So if you've noticed, something called priming, or setting the expectations beforehand. So if you are having free play time, or time that they're going to be together, is just a reminder, going back to the family charter or the family rules, or you're going to play for 20 minutes while mom's cooking or dad's cooking, but we need to make sure we keep our voices low, that we're playing kindly, and we keep our hands to ourselves. So just kind of resurfacing those rules to the front of their memory, so that way they're most likely to be successful. I like to help children see their space, similar to with peer mediation, but some children are more likely to be the kind of in other people's space. So they like to wrestle, but during especially times that it's not as modulated by a parent, helping children to kind of know where they're supposed to be and where their boundaries are. Some families and some children, it's really hard to have free play time without an adult involved. I've had parents set up boxes that are like free time boxes. So when you have to do your chores, you can pull the box for the kids that kind of have objective goals, because when there's free time, they're less likely to kind of think of how can I play, and it can be a little bit more of a conflict that has to be worked through. Visual aids of schedules and times before transitions. That can be kind of a big time where siblings can have more challenges. So visual aids can certainly help. One thing I like to have as families, and I use with children in the clinic, is having a code word, which means that they are supposed to stop. Classrooms do this all the time. They might have a bell, or there might be 1, 2, 3 eyes on me types of things. One I use in the clinic is shark attack, and if all the kids put their hands above their head like a shark. But it's something that's a little bit unexpected and kind of gets them to stop what they're doing and think, because the word stop or kind of trying to talk to them or even calling their name, sometimes they're not able to attend in. And that can also mean, okay, it's time to go to our rest spots. I've even had families put like handprints on the wall. So on a piece of paper, you know, maybe laminating a piece of paper that has a copy of their handprints, and they're on the wall of the playroom. And when they hear this word, they run over and put their hands on the wall. So it separates them naturally, kind of as a game, but it allows them to, you to help kind of work through the situation. This is my last slide, and then I'll kind of open up the floor, is talking about family regulation activities. So I kind of alluded to it before, but as an OT or occupational therapist, I am trained in sensory integration, and we all have sensory systems. We actually have 7 of them versus the 5 we teach about. But one that's really important for regulation is called proprioceptive input. So if you look online and sensory, the word sensory and occupational therapy, you'll see things about weighted blankets. All that is proprioceptive input, but it's actually even better when you're engaging in active proprioceptive input. So this is where you're thinking lift, push, pull, or hang. These activities tend to be regulatory in nature. So that's why recess is important and all those types of activities. But what can I do in the house, especially in the wintertime? Wintertime tends to be a hard time for a lot of kids, but because they're not outside as much and getting some of this input. Games, you know, to sit up in the playroom can be run and crash, and you have each child like on their own paper, colored paper, so they're separate, and they run and crash on a certain word. You can fill old milk jugs up with sand, water, etc., and paint them and hide them around the house. And then it's a scavenger hunt to find the heavy milk jugs. Laundry basket pushes, so they can push each other in a laundry basket around the house, or for a scavenger hunt. So that's all proprioceptive. Respiration or breathing is also regulatory in nature. So breathing games, one I like is blow dart races. So that would, an example would be they're lying on their stomachs with a straw and they're trying to get a cotton ball to the you know, a certain spot. You can make it a collaborative record. So how long will it take all 3 of you to get to the spot together, and you add their times versus something competitive. So kind of building in play that is regulatory in order to kind of help the family be more a regulated unit. So that is my presentation. Actually, it's mostly Laura's presentation with a little bit of a flair on the occupational therapy side. So again, I wanted to give kind of this opportunity for people to chime in and ask questions.
Thank you, Deanna. Yes, I do have a question for you. And again, please feel free to put your questions in the chat. They will go to me. They will be anonymous. So now's your chance to ask any question that you might be having that's blowing up in your house that you need answered. I do have a question here, Deanna. It says, during mediation, when you're coming to a decision and finish up with, does that work for you? Or something like that. What do you do if one child digs his or her heels in and says no, meaning there's no flexibility in their willingness to meet their sibling halfway or make any personal concessions?
Yeah, that's a great question. Kind of in those situations, at first, the first couple times I would try to just separate them. So, okay, it sounds like we're not ready for this yet. We're going to go back to our spots, give every time bedtime to cool down, and kind of work from there. You can also kind of work on some prompting questions of for the other sibling. How does it feel when Johnny isn't brainstorming ideas with us? That must feel hard, that must feel make you upset if John or Jack said that. So kind of bringing that emotional side in, trying to reflect that other piece, taking a break again. Sometimes if they realize they're really not getting their way, they will come around it. When you start a new routine, that's not uncommon to kind of dig their heels in, because this is not the way mom or dad has typically handled it. So this is weird. You know, if things continue to be really challenging, that's also when it might be worth kind of calling an expert in of how can I work through, maybe there's a certain anxiety factor with one of your children, or just something else that might need a calling Lenore, doing a few family coaching sessions or something like that if possible. There definitely, it can rise the level, and that's why we're here, that it does need a little bit of extra help.
Great, thank you. I also have a question here. Is there an example of a family charter? If perhaps you can share an example with us?
That's a great question. So I know that Stacy is going to be sending out, or somebody from NC Cares will be sending out the PowerPoint from today. I can also follow up with including an example of a family charter in that for you. Making a note to myself now.
Great, thank you. Okay, so we have, I love it. We have lots of questions coming in. Can you touch more upon the older middle child, 8, 9 years old, and how the sibling birth order relates to the sex of the child? I feel like I may have a tough combo, boy, boy, girl, with the boys only 12.5 months apart.
Yeah, so gender can certainly impact that was something we didn't go into with this presentation, but can impact it too. So it can feel a little bit more competitive for the middle child if it's a boy, boy, or girl, girl, versus if it's boy, girl. I mean, there can be similar competition, and not that it's a rule, but boys tend to be a little bit more competitive in nature. So that can be certainly an added challenge. You know, as much as possible, going back to enforcing or reinforcing their strengths and how they're equal, or how they have their unique needs, making sure that you're responding to those needs, and also trying to give them some collaborative goals that can, and praising them when they're kind of meeting those goals. So, you know, maybe it's teen boys versus teen girls in the house, and giving them something that they can work towards together, and feel some camaraderie with versus competitive against. Obviously setting the stage so that way you can, the teen girls isn't always losing, but it can be kind of a way to help them work together.
Great, thank you. What are some tips? Do you have some tips for working with a 2-year-old in terms of discussing feelings?
Yeah, that's a great question. 2-year-olds, you know, it's never too early to start. I recommend, especially for your own habits too, of talking about feelings. I think they develop the most kind of once they turn 3. There's a lot more awareness around feelings, and they're kind of more primed. But I recommend starting at the age of 9 months to 1 year, because when you can build your own habits, then it's not like, oh, now he's 3 or she's 3 and I can start talking about this. I would just set your expectations that a 2-year-old might not be able to fully grasp the depth of the emotional conversations that you're having. I would kind of label their feelings, reading lots of books. There's lots of great series out there. There's a book of Danny books of different kind of characters that have feelings. There's lots of great TV shows, and kind of bringing out those characters. What do you think they were feeling? It's okay if they don't completely get it at that point, but you just want to be helping them to learn that as they get older.
Great, thank you. Any suggestions for when it is the older brother, age 11, who is always teasing or trying to get a reaction from the younger sister who's age 9? It always ends up in the daughter calling to me, who I assume is the parent, to make the big brother stop.
Yeah, so again, this is something where you probably have to kind of start from, I don't want to say start from scratch, but start with your new plan. So how are we going to address this? You can talk about it as a family. You can have a family meeting. You know, we really want to make sure that we're all speaking respectfully to each other. So if we're not respectful, we're going to have to take time apart and then take time together. And then when you start seeing praising, whenever there is a lot of respectful language, or even if there's not disrespect going on, hey, you know what, this afternoon you guys both did great today. You were really respectful, and giving the older brother a lot of praise for kind of being neutral or respectful. There also can be, you can all have individual goals for the family. So if you kind of put in, some behavioral charts come in, but speaking respectfully for the afternoon can be a goal for the older brother. You want a goal for the younger sister too. So it seems like everybody's working and trying to, work towards something. Potentially whether it's, 10 extra minutes of TV time at the end of the day or whatnot, but you want the goal for the brother and the sister to both be equally challenging for them. So it's not just he gets that because he was kind of not behaving the way he's supposed to be. Hopefully finding an equal goal in another way. And again, serving their unique needs, it doesn't necessarily mean the same plan.
Great, thank you. Okay, can you define a little about normal bickering versus escalated and when to step in?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think some of it is that your children best, but normal bickering, when, hey, don't do that, that's not fair, probably within I would say about a minute, and things will resolve if you kind of see it go up and then down. Once things, if you see it steadily escalating, I would say once they're shouting for more than a minute, extremely high levels, that's when you're seeing it escalate. But if it kind of say every once in a while something elevates, a little bit of normal name calling, shouting for, I think that minute rule is kind of within normal limits of what bickering can be. So great questions.
Thank you. Okay, so here's the next one. Will you please re-explain taking out the box for the positive play game, giving them direction? I wasn't clear on what that was and when to do it.
Yeah, that's a great one. So the positive play box might be for Johnny's 5, maybe he likes puzzles. So it might have a 100-piece puzzle for him. Maybe he likes books. If you want to put some activities that they like, that they can do independently, that are defined versus just free play, which you're more likely to get some of the wrestling or the back and forth. But having a unique box for maybe the 7-year-old who that might be Legos or a Lego set, and what they're trying to make out of it, and I'm trying to think of other certain toys that have objectives to it, and you would pull them out when you aren't necessarily able to modulate the play. So if you really need to be cooking and you can't be fully attentive on your kids, and if they are kids that are more likely to bicker and kind of, or more than bicker, it's more likely to escalate, giving them defined activities versus kind of free play activities can set you up for success.
Okay, great, thank you. Can you talk about the middle child being left out in everyday play? My oldest and youngest like to play. The oldest thinks the youngest is so cute, and my youngest thinks his sister is so cool. The middle child is often left out. We talk about including everyone in games, etc., but naturally it isn't happening.
Yeah, that's a great question too. Everybody does have, you're going to have the affinities towards people that are like you, just like we talked about with parents and kids, but helping your children explore what they can do with each other, and maybe kind of setting some time aside for the middle and oldest, and setting time aside for the middle and youngest, and making that a little natural. Maybe the other child's getting one-on-one time, and the other two are together, but highlighting and praising their mutual interests. So if they both two of them like Legos, and they can do those together. Maybe the other two like playing board games. So trying to really highlight what is unique that can foster that relationship, and highlight that. I do want to just, I'm happy to take more questions. I do have to, as I was covering Lenore, I do have another appointment at 10:30, so I will have to sign off, but I should be able to fit in another 1 or 2 questions.
I have one more here. How would you suggest handling conflict when there is not time to separate children, allow them to cool off and come together to discuss? For example, we sometimes have conflicts in the morning before school, and by the time they get home, everyone has forgotten about what happened and why they reacted that way.
That's probably one of the most common things I work on as an OT, and we see it a lot. There's a couple things. So you can have a plan of, if we're not out the door by 7:50 in the morning, and they have to be out the door by 7:50 in order to get their extra TV time or something like that, that they're working cooperatively as a family, and also trying to set a plan. So problem solve on the weekend. How are we going to get out the door during the week? So do they need visual schedules? Do they need check-ins? Do they need to wake up 5 minutes earlier? But problem solving kind of beforehand, but you can also put a motivator to work on that piece. And you can bring it back to, we're going to now have to discuss this later instead of watching TV as a family. So it kind of is a motivator to get them out the door. But that is definitely one I see very often.
Great, thank you. I have one more. Can we squeeze it in?
Yes, we can squeeze it in.
Okay, I'll read really quickly. Older brother, younger sister. The younger sister wants to be the oldest, very alpha. Very difficult power dynamic between the two. Older child feels under attack, although he probably enjoys being the older one too. The younger doesn't want to be helped or told what to do.
Yeah, that sounds like a little bit of a tricky dynamic. And once children and families are already a little bit more elevated, they're used to these patterns continuing to happen. So it's really about, how can I break these patterns? So trying to maybe plan over the weekend of times or things that they can do that are positive together, very similar to the attachment piece between the older sibling, middle sibling, younger sibling, and intentionally picking activities that you might not see that same power struggle. Whether it's a ropes course or something that they are working together, trying to really get a cooperative or team kids, as well as something that is motivating for both of them, which might take a little bit of planning, and it's going to take time. So these patterns have been created over time, but they also take time to kind of work towards decreasing. So it's all about just sticking with it even when it's tough.
Well, great. Thank you, Deanna. We're just at 10:30, so hopefully you'll make your 10:30 meeting. And I just want to take a moment to again thank the principals at the elementary schools, the PTC presidents, and everyone who joined us today. We were happy that you joined us. I did put an evaluation in the chat. If you would like to fill it out, that'd be great. We value your feedback, and we hope to see you all again soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Stacy.
Thank you.
Thanks, Deanna. Thanks everyone for coming.